Hallelujah, Christ is risen. There's a little bit of an echo. Is that better? Good morning.
Good morning.
Oops. I think that might be better. Nope. Lee, fix it, please. This is what happens if you go to Emmanuel in Augusta. Everything gets better. Maybe not. It'll be fine. Good morning. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having a dream come true. Today, for me, is a dream come true. And in a few moments, Tim Boggs will tell you some of what that dream has been, not only for me, but for many of us. But to see it come to be this morning and to see all of your faces, some of you have come from as far south as Kittery, and we have friends here from Presque Isle and Fort Fairfield. It's a really beautiful day. There'll be time to thank and acknowledge all of the people who have made today possible. Right now, our task is to turn our hearts toward God and to be deeply mindful of the goodness and greatness that we have together as the church in Maine. Welcome. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. We praise you and we thank you, O God, for your loving kindness to your church throughout the ages. And we thank you for creating the earth and each of us in your image. We turn now to you, and with our hearts wide open, beseeching you to fill us with the power of your love. Inspire our learning today. Sanctify our discussion and bless our friendship. Your grace has sustained the design team and our speakers, and so we say aloud each of their names: Amanda, Anne, Sandy, Tim, Ted, Douglas, Susan, Joyce, Mark, Matthew, Marissa, Dan, and John, trusting that you will give them an anointing of your Holy Spirit, that they'll be filled with messages from you, and that through them you will strengthen our identity as disciples of Jesus Christ, who make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We thank you for the joy that has come and is coming into our lives through him. Give us a readiness to make an account for this joy, and as we grow in it, keep us mindful of your call to take that joy into the lives of other people. We pray all this and so much more in his matchless and beautiful name and in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Joyce Kennedy, our stewardship consultant, and Tim Boggs, who will make their way here to take us through the next part of our morning. If you could come forward. I don't know who's speaking first.
I think, why don't we have Joyce?
Great. So Joyce Kennedy is here for the first time, I think not in Bangor, but the first time at St. John's. Is that true?
Yes.
Joyce, I want a great Episcopal Maine welcome to Joyce in just a moment. Joyce is joining our team and joining you as stewardship consultant, a gift to our church from the trustees of diocesan funds to accompany every single one of our faith communities in our journey with annual commitment campaigns, with planned giving, and with capital campaigns. And so you're going to get to know Joyce very well. She continues to do wonderful work with the University of Maine, and so she's joining us for a time and will be doing both things, but without the commitment of the trustees to say, we want to invest in the health and well-being of our churches, we wouldn't have Joyce. So Joyce is joining us for the first time, and I want you to welcome her. She's a member of St. David's Church in Kennebunk. She grew up at Grace Church Bath. She knows and loves the church, and she will know and love it even more as you welcome her into your midst. So please welcome Joyce Kennedy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Bishop Brown, for that wonderful introduction. I must say, this is my first time at St. John's, and my first time standing in front of a church like this and preaching out to the parish, so bear with me as I do many of these first. But I suppose I'm standing here before you today because that is really what happens when you have dinner with Bishop Brown. See, I knew this would go over well. He and his husband Tom are very gracious hosts. They serve delicious food, the conversation is lively, the hospitality is generous, and before you realize it, someplace between coffee and dessert, you've been recruited into a new ministry. So here we are, and here I stand. Right? Thank you. But in all seriousness, though, it truly is an honor to be here today with all of you as part of the Faithful Givers Roadshow. And I am deeply grateful to Bishop Brown, Teresa Pinney, Tim Boggs, and the trustees of the diocesan funds for this opportunity to serve as your stewardship advisor. For me, this role is both professional and deeply personal. Stewardship and philanthropy have been at the center of my professional life for many years, but my connection to the Diocese of Maine goes back much further. I grew up in this diocese, and some of my earliest memories of faith, community, and belonging come from my time as a parishioner at Grace Church in my hometown of Bath and as a camper at Camp Bishopswood. Those experiences helped shape my understanding of generosity, service, and what it means to live in community with one another. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with individuals and organizations who care deeply about making a difference. What I have learned is that stewardship is never really about the money alone. It is about giving back and paying forward the blessings we ourselves have received. Stewardship is about mission, gratitude, participation, and in many times, impact. I often hear people say that they want to help others because they remember what it was like to struggle, or because someone opened a door for them when they needed it most. Stewardship at its heart is about recognizing our blessings and using them to help sustain and strengthen the ministries and communities we care most about. That is one of the reasons I am so excited about the Faithful Givers Initiative. Across Maine, our churches and chapels are doing extraordinary work, serving their communities, welcoming others, caring for those in need, and creating places of hope and belonging. Faithful Givers recognizes that strong stewardship is essential to sustaining that ministry for generations to come. In my role as stewardship advisor, I will serve as a resource to the clergy, vestries, stewardship committees, and congregations throughout the diocese by offering practical guidance and encouragement around annual giving, special fundraising efforts, legacy giving, and broader stewardship planning. Just as importantly, I hope to listen, learn, and support each parish in ways that reflect its own unique mission and community, while also helping to connect congregations by sharing ideas and best practices across the diocese. Often, some of the most effective stewardship approaches are already happening within our churches and chapels, and what works well in one parish may inspire and strengthen ministry in another. For those of you who are interested in connecting further, the diocese has added my contact information and a request form to the diocesan website under Assisting Staff, Consultants, and Contractors. Requests submitted through that form will be forwarded to me, and I can also be reached directly at jkennedy@episcopalmaine.com. I look forward to working alongside all of you in this collaborative ministry as we continue strengthening the mission and ministries of the Episcopal Diocese of Maine. Thank you very much.
Well, it's not often you get to be in the bishop's dreams, but we're all in the bishop's dreams. Good morning. I'm Tim Boggs. I'm the Vice President of the Trustees of the Diocesan Funds. And I think we are doing something today that is really fairly unknown to us. We are building a collaboration between the governing bodies of the diocese, which was really the bishop's idea. Last winter, he gathered the diocesan council, the standing committee, and the trustees together to break down our silos and talk to each other and imagine how we might grow the church together. And out of that came this idea of investing, taking some monies from the trustees, investing in a position that we imagined. We had no idea we would imagine Joyce, but the Holy Spirit's been in this project from the beginning, and she soon appeared, and we were able to work out an arrangement where she can work half-time, building up the ministries of the parish. We start from an idea that the trustees and each of the governing bodies have a responsibility to grow the church. We often think of that as growing the Sunday school or growing the pews, but there's a financial underfooting that is absolutely essential. And so we decided to step out of our analysis of stocks and bonds and investments and look into ways that we could creatively invest in growing each ministry in each parish. And we put together a little working group, which I was pleased to be the convener of, but by no means did all of the work. I want to introduce them to you. I want you to stand up and turn around as I call your name. Douglas Beck, who is on the Diocesan Council, is the vice chairman of the Diocesan Council, and is the rector. He's my rector at St. Francis by the Sea in Blue Hill. Ted Fletcher is on the Diocesan Council. The secretary is at St. Andrews and St. John's. Ann McAuley is, the Reverend Ann McAuley is a deacon at Trinity in Castine, is on the standing committee. Sandra McPhee is a co-trustee. She's the treasurer of St. David's, and also is a trustee of the church pension group, and brings an enormous experience to this project. It's been a pleasure to work with you. We've been Zooming from around the world to be together. Thank you all. They're going to be with us all day today, and we're doing this again all day tomorrow down south in Falmouth, and they'll be there as well as resources. There's a member of our working group without whom we would not be here, and it's Susan Axelrod, who is on the diocese. Please stand up. Yes, stand. Susan has guided us, corrected us, communicated for us, designed all sorts of things with guidance of her dear colleague, Teresa Penny, and it's just been a joy to work with you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. There's one other person I want to thank and introduce. When we first brought this up at a trustee meeting, we were on Zoom, and you know how on Zoom you can chat? You can chat with one person, or you can chat with the whole group. And trustees were on a Zoom meeting, and I presented this idea. And before I was a paragraph into my little paper, a little chat popped up on my screen from one of our trustees who said, "I'd like to pay for these road shows. I'd like to would the diocese accept a personal gift to pay for all the expenses associated with gathering the church in this way?" And I want to acknowledge Liz McMullen, who is a trustee and a secretary of the trustees. She's at St. Mary's and St. Jude, and a terrific friend. She's not here today, but she's going to be able to listen to us and see us on camera, I think. So thank you, Liz. We thought we better start with a prayer, which we have, and then we thought we better start with a little inspiration from another bishop. We are blessed to have Mark Hollingswood, a real Mainer. He may have been the Bishop of Ohio for, how long? 20 years? But he really lives in Maine, and his heart is here. And we asked him if he asked us how he could help. And I said, how about you give us a keynote and a germ of an inspiration to keep us going all day. So Mark, I'm going to ask you to come up. Please give Bishop Hollingsworth a welcome, and then we'll introduce our panelists and beyond with our. Ready.
morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be with you. And 3 years ago, I retired after 40-something years of ordained ministry, the second half of it mostly serving in the Diocese of Ohio, and have been living happily as Bishop Brown's lookout to keep the Diocese of New Hampshire at bay. I care a great deal about giving because it's been transformative to me personally. So what I want to do is just give you my own thoughts and reflections about that. You'll learn lots of wonderful and important and helpful tools. I just want to talk about giving as a spiritual discipline. And in order for me to do that, I really need to talk a little bit about the polity of the church. So I'm going to try to do this succinctly and quickly. But you all know that our church is a representational democracy, that all the things we do in the church are a result of being given them to do by one another. I would claim that the only human authority in the church is baptismal authority. We all have it. We all have it in the same amount. As a young rector in Lincoln, Massachusetts, I learned that there's one exception to that. The head of the altar guild has just a little bit more, but it's generous with it. But really, the only authority is baptismal authority. We all have it, regardless of our roles in the church. And our polity, the brilliance of our Constitution and canons, the way we organize ourselves, the way we agree to live together as the body of Christ. As Bishop Curry always says, in this branch of the Jesus movement, the way we agree to live together is by a process of surrendering some of our baptismal authority to one another for specific things. And we do it in the parish at annual meetings by electing vestries and wardens, and we do it by, as a diocese, by ordaining people. We invest parts of our baptismal authority in one another for specific things, those things that are designated by the Constitution and canons. We do it as a parish when we invest some of our authority in the vestry, and they further invest it in calling a rector to do specific things, not everything, and not to be the only one doing it, but to be responsible for those things. So we live together in this dynamic of investing our authority in one another to carry out the life and work of the body of Christ. And I suggest to you that in the mystery of God, we do not receive that invested authority as authority. We receive it as responsibility. So people would say, well, to me, that's the bishop's authority. And I'd say, I don't believe so. It may be my responsibility because you gave it to me. You elected me to serve in this position, and it's the responsibility of this position, and you gave me tools to do that, and those tools may feel authoritative, but it is not my authority. It is our authority that we carry out together. And so, for me, and I was baptized in the Diocese of Maine 72 years ago. I don't remember one drop of it, but I re-up year after year in large part because of how we have agreed to live together. Because I need it. I need to live in a dynamic where I am giving over my will to those I trust to be responsible, giving my authority investing it in others. Because it's calisthenics for giving myself to God. If I can't give some of my baptismal authority to you and to you and to you, how am I going to give my will to God? I need help with that. Those of you who are familiar with recovery programs will know the third step. Made a decision to turn my life and my will over to a power greater than I. It's the way we get new life. And I believe that's why God calls us together as the body of Christ, is to learn how to do that. And we do it in a specific way in our church that is unlike most other bodies of Christians, particularly in this country. We were designed, our polity designed by in the same era and by the same people who designed the federal government. And I don't think we're doing it very well as a government federally. And I think we've struggled from time to time to do it, but it makes us a messy lot, because anything anybody cares about can come into the system and make its way through by paths that we've agreed to, and not so that we get our way, but rather so we give our way up. We give our way to God. So our polity is essential to me in understanding everything that we do, as not just as a church, but everything I do as a Christian. And giving is the same thing, is the same way. Giving is a spiritual discipline. When I was a child, we had offertory envelopes. I don't know if in your parishes they have those. I remember getting the box every year, and we would put a quarter in, which was a good thing, because when I took it in my hand, I always dropped it right at the quiet point in the Eucharistic service or during the sermon. But we all had that, and we always put money in the plate when it came by. And that was, I didn't know it then, but that was a discipline. It was a physical discipline. And today when I go to church, even though I make a pledge and I may write a check once or twice a year, I always put something in the plate, because I need that physical, prompt reminder that calisthenics for giving myself to God. If I can't write the check out or put the money in the place, how am I going to turn my life and my will over to God day after day after day? So I understand giving for me to be a spiritual discipline. It's something I had to learn over years and years. I don't give to keep the lights on, although what I give helps do that. I don't give to pay, keep the building up or pay the salaries. I don't give because it's my duty. I really don't give it because it's my responsibility. I give because I need to. I need to over and over and over in order to surrender myself to God more and more fully, day after day after day. We pray in the Eucharistic prayer that we join with Christ in his sacrifice. And, we sort of shy away from sacrifice because we misinterpret it as meaning you have to die. And we use that word, we die to sin and all, but sacrifice doesn't mean to die. It's from the Latin. It means to make holy, to make good. Think baseball. It all goes back to baseball. Sacrifice fly, sacrifice bunt. It makes good. It makes blessedness. It moves the other player along. And this dynamic that we as Episcopalians live out in all the things that we do, in electing delegates to diocesan convention, and having them electing bishops. We're taking baptismal authority from the pews, investing in each other, further investing it through diocesan convention and deputies to general convention, and they exercise that, our baptismal authority that we have surrendered, that we've sacrificed, that we've given for goodness. And that dynamic, that cycle of giving myself and giving my authority and receiving responsibility is what has given me life. There are some people in this room who've known me a long, long time. One of my camp counselors is in this room. He knew me 60 years ago. And there are people in this room who knew me through many ups and downs. When I was 15 years, graduated my 15th anniversary from boarding school, one of my classmates put together a book of where everybody was now after 15 years. And mine said, Mark Hollingsworth Jr. is an Episcopal priest and rector of St. Anne's in the Fields, Lincoln, Massachusetts, period. Seriously, period. This continuous cycle of surrendering my self-will and receiving responsibility is what's saved my life. And that's why I think giving is so critical, and why I think teaching about it is so critical. So, this event, faithful givers, what makes a faithful giver? To me, is when my giving is a spiritual discipline. When I came to Ohio, shortly after we established the bishop's annual appeal, and it taught me a huge amount about giving. I wanted to do it because I wanted to leverage the relationship with the episcopacy, draw people, connect them with it, so that they felt a part of the ministry of unity. But I didn't realize how much I would learn. I signed every acknowledgement letter and wrote a note. I would meet people in parish visitations, and it would click, and I'd think, oh, she's the one who sends a check every month. A little check every month. And I thought, I imagined her sitting at the table writing out the electricity bill and the phone bill, and a check to the diocese as a spiritual discipline. Over and over. She's as responsible, and all the people like her, as responsible for my theology of giving, as responsible as anybody else, because she modeled for me what it means to make giving a spiritual discipline. I said that I think it's critical to teach about this. We often hear people say, well, that's a teaching opportunity. I think it's a teaching responsibility. And I think we can connect it with all the things we do. That's why I go always back to the polity of the church. Everything we do, the agreements we make, how to live together, are all about giving ourselves more completely, letting go to God. So I think with that, you're retired for 3 years after all these years serving in the church, and a nice guy like Tim Boggs said, will you speak for 15 minutes? And I thought, yeah, try and stop me. But I want to say this. It feels like everybody in the church has my phone number, because there's no anonymity about me and about how to reach me. And You can call me anytime about any of this stuff, because I think it's the most important stuff in the church, and the opportunities that you give to people to develop a spiritual discipline that prepares them for what is inevitable, giving themselves to God fully, is a great gift. And we don't give of ourselves to get to heaven. We give of ourselves to bring heaven to earth. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. That was just right in 15 minutes. Let's do some teaching. One of the things we learned in our working group, in our conversations, is that there is so much talent in this realm, in this church, in the world in which we live. There's talent right here in this room. There's talent in all of the parishes that we're so proud to represent and be part of. And we did some discerning of what are the issues that we really want to grapple with practically. So we made sort of some distinctions. They might be a little bit arbitrary, and we'll let our panelists sort of sort out when they step on each other's subject matters and ideas, but there's a need to address all four of these. One is the building up of our endowments, our investments, our capacities to have sustaining financial opportunity into the future. This is a key moment. We're at a key moment in history of an enormous transfer of wealth from one generation to another in this country. And as you know, every charity, every university, every college, every camp, certainly every one I've ever went to, are looking for my help as my generation changes. And we need to be better at building on that opportunity. The second topic that we chose was our annual giving. How do we do this well? How do we make this really sing? Really be that faithful generating piece that Mark spoke about? How do we take advantage of those opportunities, those periodic opportunities to have a capital campaign that generates something that's lasting? Whether it's an endowment for a position, a campaign for a building, a campaign to repair something that's broken, a campaign to imagine something that we haven't ever imagined before. So capital campaigns was our third. And then we know our diocese well, and we know that the struggle that it faces in different corners in different ways. So we wanted to also include in our program the question of how do we do this when it's hard? How do we do this when we really have to pay attention to what we're learning and what we're hearing? So we took those four topics and we found four great people. I'm going to ask them to come and sit at the table while I introduce each of them by name, and then I'm going to ask you each in the first few sentences of your remarks to add a little bit more introduction to who you are and why you're here. So please come sit at the table. We're going to start with Marissa Swithton, who has this great title, National Director, Foundation and Institutional Advisory at Alliance Bernstein. Alliance Bernstein is one of the key financial advisors to your trustees of diocesan funds. We're managing now approaching $50 million, and Bernstein helps us do that well. And Marissa has a fabulous job. Her job is to advise folks like us on how to do what we're doing better. And she's terrific, and it's great to have you here. Thank you for coming to Maine. Welcome to Maine. Annual giving development, we're looking very close to home to Amanda Gherkin Nelson, the rector of St. Bart's in Yarmouth, Yarmouth, yes, who's had an amazing new rectorship, relatively new rectorship, building up a mid-sized parish in a very creative and special way. And she's going to talk about that. John, you get the prize for coming the farthest. John Toyce is currently the Associate Rector of St. James in Los Angeles, but the bishops have this way of doing this. He's been snapped out of that job, and he's going to become the canon to the ordinary of the Bishop of Los Angeles in July. So welcome, John, for coming across the country. It's great to have you. And John is going to focus on capital campaign development for mission, ministry, and facilities. And then maybe getting the hardest assignment is my seminary classmate, Matthew Dayton Welsh, who's the rector of Church of the Epiphany in New York City. He's going to talk about how we do all this when it's difficult, when it's special and a challenge. So welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. And we're going to ask you to come in that order. Marissa, make your way up and start. And each of them will have some use of the screen.
This, and then we're going to move this. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Marissa Sweiston. I am absolutely delighted to be here from Nashville. I grew up in Michigan, then Chicago, then New York, now Nashville. Met my wife and never left, so now I'm a Southern girl, but delighted to be in Maine for this beautiful weather and to be here today. I really want to thank all of you for having us and for including me, Dan, in this conversation, Bishop Brown, Tim, the trustees. This is a really exciting conversation for me because I come from 25 years in the social sector, so philanthropy, fundraising, giving as a spiritual practice is something that's very close to my heart. Because I've worked for a lot of nonprofit organizations, it's often a lean team, a volunteer board, charitable giving, which means that everyone's wearing a lot of hats. And that means we need as much efficiency, education, shared knowledge and learnings so that we can do what we do. And I think really today is about, in the very brief 20 minutes that I have, as much as I can share on what we're seeing in endowment, not just how endowments work, but how we're seeing some of our other clients work with endowments. And then just there will be a lot of quips and some data and some stats. So as you're hearing some of these pieces, I'd love to welcome future conversation, whether it's later today or separate meetings with your parish or however we can be helpful. So I'll say quickly, the reason that we're an investment management firm, we've been around for 60 years, and in that time, we've built ecosystems around the different types of clients that we support. Tax-exempt clients of varied mission areas are the team that I oversee. So this wheel here is really just to say there's a whole set of holistic services outside of, but part of, our investment management that we're focused on. Philanthropic giving and donor engagement and how those donors are making decisions is a real big focus, especially to Tim's point. We're in the midst of a wealth transfer. There's a lot of really generous dollars coming down through generations, and for those who care to give and want to give, they're looking for as much guidance as our fundraisers are looking for when they steward those funds. So, a big piece of our focus each year is to pull together thought leadership. And we didn't have a really solid definition for financial health. I've worked in the sector for large institutions like the Art Institute of Chicago. I've run a small family foundation. I've built a nonprofit maternity clinic in West Africa. And even in all of that, I really didn't have a sense for how can you define what financial health looks like. So we partnered with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We checked out 800,000 IRS Form 990s. Long story short, we came up with some quantitative data and some qualitative data, and I'm going to land the plane on how that relates to endowments. So one big piece of the quantitative that will be not new to any of the financial leaders here. There are various ratios that we're checking out on the regular. Overhead ratio, how you're covering your debt, what access to debt you have, how much you have in reserves. So that wasn't necessarily surprising to us as we dug into financially healthy organizations. What was exciting is that we uncovered that there are kind of harder to measure metrics that kept bubbling to the surface in our conversations about financial health. One of those qualitative metrics, one of the pieces that leaders who are overseeing churches and private schools and other organizations who are tax exempt, one of those was whether or not they had an endowment. So that's revenue diversification, so whether or not they had earned income, charitable income, whether or not they had strong board governance was that third category, and then whether or not they had an endowment. So these organizations that are that came kind of through our research as healthy organizations either had an endowment or had recently launched an endowment and were growing that endowment. Now, I think this is important to note because anyone who's fundraised knows that you have that challenge when you're talking to donors around why would you shuttle those funds into an account that's sitting there and growing over time when there's so much need in the community. It's a really difficult dichotomy that you have to educate your team and your board on. And so I think just knowing that there's a reason, it's not just savings. We tend to understand savings in our personal accounts, but then when it comes to the organizations that we care about, we like to have really low overhead and to give all of our dollars out. But the point is, it is a factor of financial health to have a long horizon endowment. We're going to get into exactly how we define endowment. So before I get into that, though, I circled something on our Giving USA data, which is that $150 billion every year is given to religious causes. So there's so much capacity out there. There's almost $600 billion given out every year. So if you add sort of the individual giving, 66%, with some of the foundation gifts and the bequests, we're getting really close to almost 100% is our funds that you could be stewarding specifically for an endowment. So I won't go into that because I know we'll talk a little bit about some of the other general fundraising, but I wanted to say when we think about endowments, we think about them in three different ways. As an investment management firm, we're thinking about how they're invested, what the operational concerns are, and what the governance concerns are. So part of the investment conversation is once you've built an endowment, how is it invested? And it's really important to note that different sizes of endowments are invested in very different ways. So this slide here is just conveying that very large endowments tend to take a little bit more risk in the way that they're invested. They have more alternatives, they have other private equity, other things that are lock up those funds and produce a little more return, but are a little bit riskier. Smaller organizations are invested in different ways. So as we're thinking about the endowments that you may already have, it's really important to take a look at your investment policy statement every year or two just to check, are we invested in a way that's bringing us the greatest return? On national averages, we tend to see a return between 7 and 10+% for endowment funds. So as you're thinking about some of that financial modeling, which we can certainly help you with, just keeping in mind that that's kind of the goal for returns. So I wanted to, when we were prepping for today, I wanted to make sure that I brought a few examples. So again, this is back to sort of the financial modeling. So as we're thinking about this from a governance and operations perspective, we want to be able to make the case to our teams and to our donors that endowment fundraising is really worthwhile. So not to go into this entire slide here, but what you're seeing on the right is an investment of $10 million over time. And you can see how much that $10 million creates just substantial compounding interest and gets us to a point where we have double, triple, quadruple the funds that were invested. This is really helpful, we're finding, with investors who are interested in giving charitably, who are interested in giving spiritually. This is the kind of impact that they really like to see. So as you're thinking about endowment fundraising, being able to show charts and data and these sorts of insights. I was just on a call earlier this week where we supported an organization a donor came to them and said, I would like to give $10 million. We want to replace our annual fund gift with this $10 million gift. Unfortunately, they crunched some numbers. The organization realized it wasn't going to fulfill the needs that they had for their operations and programs each year. So they went back to the donor with a similar calculation and showed them, if you give us $15 million instead, this is how it can grow grow over time. Now, this is a conversation certainly with a donor whose spirituality aligns. They already want to give. We know they're in the right place to invest with an endowment. But the idea is for all of those individual donors in your midst who are giving larger gifts or giving gifts that are of non-traditional assets, they're having these conversations with other organizations. So they really do welcome a conversation around the financial modeling to live their legacy with you. I also want to note, I think before we start with any of the endowment conversations with donors, we really need to think about meeting them where they're at with their values, and I have a sense we'll probably get into some of that later today. But an endowment is a vehicle, right? It is, let's get to that point. So endowments as a vehicle, for anyone who hasn't started one yet or is thinking about it, I think a lot of times when we think of endowments, we think of large institutions, either very large churches or very large academic institutions. They have multi-billion-dollar endowments, and those funds are there to support various departments and programs. But by definition, an endowment itself is a long horizon fund that's restricted. It's not always restricted by a donor. That would be sort of the true endowment that we're used to hearing about. There's a quasi-endowment. So this is the type of fund where you establish that with a donor or a grouping of donors, and it's board designated. So the trustees get to decide, when do we want to use this? How do we use this? What's our spending rate? How is it invested? So it's a restricted fund, usually created in partnership with some donors, but really the donors are using trust-based philanthropy to say, you guys use this the way that you want to. Decide on your spending rate, decide how it's invested. The other types of endowments, term endowment, this is one that exists for a certain period of time. Once that time frame has expired, the funds can be used usually for unrestricted purposes by the board. And then an unrestricted endowment, of course, the best kind, which is when a donor says, you can use this however you want, it can be invested however you want, the spending rate can be whatever it is. So it's also important when you're talking to donors to think about educating your team and educating those donors on what matters to you. Is this a true endowment where you'd like to restrict it for a certain piece of our property or for certain projects? Ideally convincing them that operational needs that they can cover, that you can decide they can cover in the future, are really helpful. So I wanted to maybe cover some conversations for those who do not yet have an endowment, and then I'll wrap it up with a couple more examples. If you do not yet have an endowment, can I actually just see maybe a raise of hands if you're thinking about launching one but don't yet have it? Okay, got a few. And for those maybe who've had an endowment for a few years but are really looking to scale it? Okay, great. Awesome, thank you for sharing. So these are the 4 steps, and you will have these slides, and there's a whole host of other slides that are involved here. But we always like to say you should start with a revenue analysis. Organizations we're working with right now are starting with where are our funds coming in, specifically foundation grants and individual grants. Then you decide within those how to segment your donor base. And that's a really important step, because I think a lot of times we get questions from fundraisers around, we don't necessarily know who the type of donor is that's giving endowments, or we don't have access to those donors. So you really have to know sort of first who is in your donor base before you make a decision for how you're going to reach out to them. We have something called a blended giving work plan. It's actually a kind of a workflow and a timeline where you can track all the steps to come up with a fundraising plan for high net worth individuals, including all the different types of gifts they might use to give to you through an endowment, but that would be a separate tool. So once you've done that revenue analysis and you've decided we're good to go, we have a pretty decent idea for the individual donors who might be interested in endowment, then it's about strategic decision making between the board and the team, the trustees and the team, to say, within this base, our donor base, we've come up with 3 to 5 people who we'd like to start this conversation with. And I know we're going to hear about capital campaigns today, but where we see a lot of success in these larger fundraising plans is when you treat the endowment fundraising campaign as a capital campaign. So give yourself those 3 to 5 years and start embarking on a plan to have some of those conversations. So everyone's probably heard of a feasibility study. A feasibility study is sort of those conversations that you're having in the beginning with donors. So you're talking to them, asking them what they're interested in, and starting to get a sense for their values and the way they want to give. Policies and documents, we list this here. We have sample documents that we can provide. This is a really important piece. This is when it's time to start the endowment, or when you're bringing a new donor in, you want to make sure that you have template documents that both you and the donor are supportive of. In those documents, there should typically be the type of programs or initiatives they're willing to cover. If there's any discussion around the spending rate, that would also be reflected there. But there also needs to be some discussion around who's making those endowment decisions should that donor pass. So just making sure that you have all of those policy documents, not a very exciting topic, but really important. And then finally, staff and board education. This is the piece where we probably see the most productivity, because when you're teaching your team and you're teaching your trustees and you're teaching your donors about why you're fundraising around this and how it fits into your wider plan, that's really where you get a lot of excitement around the purpose for the endowment in the future. I probably didn't say this in the beginning and should have, but one of the reasons we really believe endowment funds are important is because it truly is a vote in the institutional confidence of your mission and your organization. So this is not an excuse to forego annual fundraising. It's not an excuse not to run a capital campaign. It's a reminder to everyone who's interested in your legacy that the future of your organization can sustain something like COVID or funding cuts in the future. So these are really long horizon funds to make sure that you're here in perpetuity. I want to maybe mention a few resources for after today's conversation. So one of the things that we know happens as part of endowment fundraising is all those donors who are passing wealth down through their generations, 96% of that wealth is held in non-cash assets. So if we think about, maybe let's just imagine there are donors in your midst who are 70 and a half and above. One of the kind of most common vehicles that we see is an IRA rollover, and it becomes a QCD, and they can use that to fund an endowment. We're also seeing a lot of stock gifts funding endowments. We're seeing a lot of donor advised fund funding endowments. So we have trainings, education, customizable language you can add to your website. All of these pieces are available to you to make sure that when you are in front of donors and you're having conversations around their potential endowment or their other non-cash giving, that you know exactly what to say. So I'm going to end with three examples quickly. So I mentioned that we worked with an organization recently who was talking to an existing donor. So this was a donor that was already giving, I think, $2 million a year and wanted to think about an endowment. That was a sophisticated donor. So the communication with that sophisticated donor included financial modeling. It included a strategic plan that went along with that giving, and we're probably in the fourth conversation at this point. So for those of you who have established endowments and have some of these sophisticated gifts, I think we need to segment that part of the conversation for those sophisticated donors in a very specific way. We can help with that. You're welcome to see a sample packet that we sent to those donors if you'd like to replicate any of the information therein. A second example I wanted to share, we're working with a nonprofit organization right now that's starting an endowment. They received a bequest, and they're using that bequest to fund an endowment, and now they're crowdfunding within the community. So they're using those funds as an endowment. They're investing them in the long horizon. They're using a spending policy of 3%. You typically see between 3 and 5%. But then they're funding that endowment as a community. They just wrapped a capital campaign, and now they're moving on to endowment funding. So you've got this one example of a very established donor. Second example would be building it yourself and fundraising specifically for it. The third example, I think, really speaks to donor communication. We're working with an organization who is very well funded. They happen to receive a Mackenzie Scott gift, and so they've been having this struggle with their donors. Their donors want to know why they're still fundraising around their endowment. So their entire narrative around that endowment fundraising has to do with what happened during COVID for this organization. They were a food insecurities organization. They could not feed their community. They could not report to work. So their narrative for why they need an endowment is we don't want to relive our lack of mission delivery that we lived through during COVID. So every conversation they're having is matching those potential endowment funds against that narrative of sustainability to ensure that the donor knows that their legacy will live on. One other example I want to say that we see come up pretty regularly, there is a trend of, I have 2 minutes, there is a trend of foundations spending down. We're seeing a lot of that. So as family foundations are sunsetting, partly because of the wealth transfer, they don't know that their kids are that interested in their philanthropic plan. They don't know that the third generation will be interested. So we're seeing quite an increase in spend downs for private foundations. Those private foundations, I just spoke to one yesterday who said, we don't have the ability to oversee our legacy. We want the endowments, they're setting up multiple. We want the endowments that we're setting up to be our legacy. So there's so much opportunity out there. If you're ever nervous about having conversations around endowments, it truly is for certain types of donors. So back to that donor segmentation practice, you want to make sure you're talking to the right people. But then just keep in mind that there are so many different ways that those donors fund endowments. And I'm sorry I don't have more time to tell you about what all of those are, but thank you for listening to my very quick 20 minutes. Hope that was okay.
Make your way up. I wanted to acknowledge and welcome Dan Shea. Where are you? Marissa's colleague from Bernstein. I think you've got a flavor of why your trustees are working so closely with Bernstein. This talent is we see in every corner of the trustees' work with them. Thanks so much for being here. Amanda, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Can the projector make it so that the slide is fully seen? We lost a lot of all of the slides on the left side.
Hard to see.
We're doing the best we can.
Yep. And we will share the slides if anyone's
But we'll have all the slides. Oh, and after we break up here, you're going to have a chance to decide to chat with each or two of the panelists that we chose for questions.
It's not for a minute, so take your time. Okay. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be with you all. Truly, I am here this morning representing Jim, John, Polly, Jeff, Jay, and Basil. They are the lay leaders who are the energy and creative force of our stewardship ministry at St. Bart's, but I will try to do my best and try to do their ministry justice by sharing a bit about what we do together. And I have to say at the outset that I don't know that what we do at St. Bart's is particularly exceptional. I'm hoping that you will find resonance with what you do in your own parishes with what I share this morning. But I do think that we're faithful, and that has borne fruit for us in the past 4 years. At St. Bart's, there's an expression, it's St. Bart's, it'll get done. And I remind my folks all the time that behind that expression is a lot of hard work. And preparing these remarks this morning, it was a wonderful reminder to me of the hard work that we do. So thanks for the opportunity to share. A little about myself. I was ordained in the Lutheran Church and served a congregation in Connecticut before becoming the executive director of Extraordinary Lutheran Ministries, a nonprofit that advocates for and supports LGBTQIA+ clergy and seminarians in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And as such, I was also the director of fundraising. 5.5 years ago, my wife and I had our first child, and I reached out to my ELCA bishop and said, I'm ready to be home more, and I'd love to serve a congregation again and be in a parish. And he said, well, if you want to stay in Maine, you should really have a conversation with the Episcopal Church. There's more Episcopalians up there. So I happened to be renting an office on the 3rd floor of Loring House. So I just walked downstairs. And I had a conversation with the canon to the ordinary at the time, who was Michael Ambler, and I said, well, I'd love to get back into parish ministry. And I said, maybe in the next year or two, and he said, how about this summer? And that's how I became connected to St. Bart's, and last fall, after a year of discernment, I became an Episcopal priest. So a little bit about my journey. Thank you. So now a little bit about St. Bart's. We are a younger parish in the scheme of things. We were a mission start in the early 1970s, and we're intended to be a parish physically between the churches in Falmouth and in Brunswick, we're in Yarmouth, and also kind of like liturgically and organizationally in between, meaning, you know, our worship has always been creative and not strictly by the book, which when, you know, you hire a Lutheran is a great thing at first to get me used to the Book of Common Prayer. But 5 years ago, in the midst of the pandemic, St. Bart's underwent a large listening initiative of its members in the hopes of getting a sense of who the congregation was now and who they wanted to be, and also members' level of comfort with the idea of calling a part-time priest. While the financial outlook wasn't yet dismal, things were starting to feel pinched. So over 80 members participated in one-on-one phone interviews that helped the congregation develop 4 goals. The first was they felt confident they could move forward with a part-time clergy person. The second was they wanted to reinvigorate lay leadership. 3, they wanted to be able to steward their building and the property a little bit more. And 4, they wanted to be able to give more money to our outreach partners. So number 1, part-time clergy. That's me. I was called in 2022 to be the priest in charge at 20 hours. And if you talk to the leaders of the church, this decision was not just a financial one. It also is very much related to that second goal of reinvigorated lay leadership. The leaders of the church heard clearly in that listening initiative that lay leaders were feeling a little deflated. Committees had kind of become defunct. So while a part-time priest might help the finances not feel quite so pinched, it also gave lay leaders the opportunity, really required them, to step back into leadership roles in the church. The congregation recognized that you can't expect a part-time priest to do full-time work in 20 hours, and so our responsibilities were divided up. I'm the CFO, the Chief Faith Officer. Lay leaders fill the rest of our C-suite, if you really like that image. But really what this means is that the leadership of the church is shared. To the point where we've had lay leader retreats the past few years, which is our vestry and our committee co-chairs. And at these gatherings, the first one we had in 2022, we met a few times and actually created a new mission for the church. We established goals and as well as tactics on how we wanted to achieve those goals that then kind of trickled down into every committee on how every committee kind of took a minute to say, and how do the things that we do as a committee relate to these goals and add to the energy of who we want to become. And we review those goals annually. So the power and energy of the church is really in our lay leadership, that baptismal. The bishop was right there for a second. There he is. We have been able to steward our building. That was the third goal. One of the things we did was create a building and grounds reserve fund to cover some capital improvements. For the 5 years, so 1 year before me and the 4 that I'd been there, we've actually had budget surpluses at the end of the year, and that chunk of money has gone into this building and grounds reserve fund, and it has meant that we've been able to do some significant work on our property, like paint the building, repave our driveway, etc., without having to do major capital campaigns. We did have a small capital campaign to do a few bigger projects that popped up. And the fourth goal of being able to give more in outreach money, before making the decision to have a part-time priest, we had a few fundraisers that had always intended to be fundraisers that would help us raise money for outreach. And some of that was starting to have to go to the bottom line. But now with this new change and this vision, we were able to kind of repurpose that again. And between what we budget for outreach, a few specific fundraisers, we have an art show in the fall where we turn our sanctuary into a gallery. We do a lobster bake in the summer. We give a little portion of our Christmas fair this past year. The Good Friday offering, which we participate in, the United Thank offering. In 2025, our total giving to outreach was a little over $40,000. Part of why I tell you all of this is because the hard work of ministry, that's the hard work of ministry that we've been working on together over the past 4.5 years, and it is the underpinning of our stewardship campaign. This is what we have asked the congregation to support us in helping us do, and they have. Our ministries also include many of the other things that make a church a church. We have vibrant worship and music program. We have vibrant formation ministries. We do a day of service where as a community we go out to 4 different partners and come back and have a meal. We have great fellowship. We've welcomed over 40 families of different shapes, sizes, and ages over the past 4.5 years. And we have really responded to this vision of who we say we want to be. And I mentioned that I'm the part-time clergy person, and that's only partially true because I'm only part-time until Monday. Monday, I become full-time at St. Bart's. But part of that is because last fall, we pushed our budget. We asked our congregation to help us increase our budget by 12%, and they responded by actually giving us $30,000 more than what we asked them to. I think that's why the bishop asked me to be on this. But let me tell you what our stewardship looks like. And again, I don't know that we are exceptional, but we are faithful. And our stewardship is one of the ministries that helps us seek to be those things that we have set out to be together. Like many stewardship campaigns, we write letters. I write a letter, our wardens write a letter, and the stewardship committee writes 2 letters. One letter goes to people who have pledged before, another letter goes to those who have never pledged. The letter from our wardens includes a proposed budget for the upcoming year, which has been provided to us by our finance committee and the vestry, and explains any increases or flushes out any of the goals that we're setting out for the upcoming year. All of the letters connect to a theme that we have established together for that year. We've used the Episcopal Network for Stewardship to get that theme. Like this past year, we used their Rooted in Abundance materials. But we've also picked a theme sometimes based on who we are and what we're trying to achieve. So, for example, when we were celebrating our 50th anniversary, we used the prayer from Dag Hammarskjöld, for all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. So that was our theme one year also. With the letters, we send a pledge card that folks can fill out, or it gives them instructions on how to pledge online. We use Realm, just like the diocese, which is the primary way folks pledge and give to the church. So in many ways, the basic structure of our stewardship campaign probably sounds familiar and fairly simple. So I was in discernment with a few of our leaders of what makes our process maybe a little bit different. This is where I'm like, okay, I think it's okay the bishop hears me say this. Okay, we created a liturgical season, and we call it the Season of Gratitude. And it overlaps with the period that we are doing our stewardship campaign. So it's the months of October and November, the very end of Pentecost. The theme for that season is the same as the theme for that stewardship campaign, which gets reflected in the liturgy. So things like the opening acclamation, or in our prayers, or the music that we pick, or the Eucharistic prayer that we pick for that season, all reflect the theme that we've picked for our stewardship campaign. I make sure to preach at least once on the theme and on the importance of financial stewardship during this season, and I honestly do try to do it throughout the year too. Through this season, before the final blessing in the liturgy, there are testimonies of gratitude that are offered by pledging members of the congregation, and if we have the technology, I'd love for you to listen to one of them. And I might need to give you this little microphone, right, Susan?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yes, that's it.
Good. Make this bigger.
Good, we good? I thought if I talked the week after the bishop was here, the numbers would be down. Obviously, I clearly miscalculated that. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Jordan Henshaw. I've been coming to St. Bart's for a few years now. I normally come with my lovely wife, Allison, and our boys Parker and Rowan. Today is the puck drop for the 6U Tsunamis, so little kids hockey. And so Allison and Parker are there, but they send their love. And so I was asked to talk about why St. Bart's and to tie it into a tree metaphor. So just that was required before you critique. But I think I just want to start with, we heard 2 weeks ago from Jay about the foundation of this church and the foundation of how they started coming to St. Bart's. And Jay said they started coming in 1985, which is actually the year that I was born. And I thought, no, that was a good, why'd you guys laugh? That was such a beautiful segue to me, and it's just one of those little things that shows me how truly intertwined we are here at St. Bart's. So I'm going to start with our roots a little bit, and then I'll jump into trees. So Allison and I are not from Maine. I think you guys, what Mainers would say, we're from away. Allison is from the south side of Chicago. She is a Polish-Mexican Catholic. That is a thing. Catholic school upbringing and a Jesuit university. I was born in West Texas and grew up overseas by two very conservative Church of Christers, Bible Belt of Texas. And so we have very different roots. We have very different roots from each other, and we have very different roots from all of you. And we're not Episcopalians by trade or by birth. Yet, when we come to St. Bart's and when we came at the beginning, we were church hopping. We were trying to find a place where we felt welcomed. And we came to St. Bart's and no one cared that we didn't have the same roots. And no one cared that we weren't from here. And no one cared that we were this weird, Catholic, Christian mix of family. And that we had a very loud 3-year-old at the time. We were welcomed with open arms. And for me, that's why St. Bart's. Because we truly are, we're growing as trees together in this forest, this family forest of St. Bart's. And it doesn't matter what our roots are, and it doesn't matter if sometimes we're weak or sometimes we're strong. It doesn't matter if we're the little saplings like Iris and Rowan, or the little cantankerous Parker and Jack and Oliver, or if we're middle-aged trunks like me and Amanda, or if we're the oaks that built, that sounded worse than I meant it to be. I apologize. I was supposed to say pines. Pines. I will never be asked to speak again. Or if you're the strong oak that Jay talked about that helped build this church and we see every day in the beams here. But when we come here, none of that matters. We all lean on each other like a forest, and a forest grows together and we're intertwined. And when one tree is weak, everyone jumps in to help. And we saw that firsthand when we didn't know you guys very well, and we sort of went away and we came back with a little half-black baby, and everyone just welcomed us again. And people showed up at our house, Imelda and Susan right here showed up at our house with food and books and love, and welcomed little Rowan into this place as well. And that is St. Bart's. That is the love and the family that you feel when you walk in the door. So thank you to everyone for making us feel so welcome. And if there's anyone new here, I know that you'll feel that same love very soon. So thank you all.
So the point of the testimonials is to weave into the theme, but also to answer that question of why St. Bart's and why they pledge and why they give. At the end of our season of gratitude, we bless our pledges and the ministries that they will help flourish. Every person who receives a stewardship letter also receives a phone call from a member of the stewardship committee or from a member of the vestry. I was talking with one of our stewardship committee members, Basil, who said that he, called one of our members and got her voicemail on her phone, and it said, "Hi, this is Alice. Leave a message after the tone. If you're calling asking for money, you can hang up right now." So he left a message that said, "It's Basil calling from the stewardship committee." She pledged. So, and then also everyone who pledges gets a handwritten thank you note within 2 days of us receiving that pledge from a member of the stewardship committee. So these are some of the tangible things that we add to our stewardship process that I think make a difference. And then there are some intangibles. At St. Bart's, your participation is anticipated. I don't say expected, but your participation is anticipated. Whether it be participating in big things like listening sessions, or participating on a committee, or coming to fellowship events, or participating in worship as a lector or chalice bearer, we anticipate that folks are participating in making St. Bart's who we are, even to the point of those lay leaders at those retreats where we actually got the goals and tactics. We do that together. And therefore, there is trust. Trust in our leadership, and trust that what we are seeking to do and what we are asking you to support comes from the energy of the congregation and our leaders at that top level. The vestry, the C-suite, the stewardship committee are just helping to foster that and grow that and make it vital and sustainable. And what we do is transparent. We are honest about where we are, what we're asking for, and why. And finally, we celebrate. We celebrate what God is doing in our midst. I read a book in seminary on stewardship, and it was called Ask, Thank, Tell. And I think I would change it just ever so slightly to Ask, Thank, Celebrate. We celebrate who we are and where we've come from at things like a harvest dinner. We celebrate new members by welcoming them in our liturgy and saying, we look forward to how you're going to change us and help us grow. The congregation has celebrated many of my own milestones with them in ministry as I've grown and changed in titles and time over the years. We celebrate. And I don't want to get rid of the instruction to tell. As I've said, we're not necessarily exceptional, but we're faithful. The foundation of all that we do at St. Bart's is the everlasting love and grace of God. And as the CFO, the Chief Faith Officer, I never stop telling that story, because I love to tell the story. And yes, I'm about to sing, because this is what I do. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know it's true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I bet you know the refrain. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. Thank you.
John and Matthew, your jobs have gotten more difficult. Welcome, John, folks.
Well, it's good to be a stranger from a foreign land. And before I really start getting into anything, I just really want to invite you all to, as I'm telling the story of our capital campaign that we underwent at St. James 6 years ago, I don't think there would have been anybody in the parish who ever would have thought it was possible. So feel free to imagine that things could be different 6 years from now. That would have seemed impossible. Oh. So 6 years ago, I was a non-stipendiary priest mostly because the parish at which I'm currently serving was running about a $200,000 deficit, and we had about 2.5 years left of savings before that would have been gone as well. So that kind of underscores the impossibility of, I think, the situation that we were in. But nevertheless, we were in a 100-year-old building. It was consecrated in 1926. And like so many churches, up until the 60s, 70s, things were going great. And then things started slowing down a little bit. So throughout the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, we started to have increasing deferred maintenance on our building. Another change that was happening over the last few years was that LA was getting hotter and hotter in the summertime. And so if we had any big weddings or funerals in the summertime and the space was packed, we literally had people passing out or excusing themselves because they were starting to feel ill. So increasingly, our parishioners were getting more and more vocal. It is time to get air conditioning in our church. So we started talking to a few people about that just to understand what the cost might be, and we quickly realized that we had a couple problems. The first one was the electrical capacity of our building would not support air conditioning, and we were also going to have to make some structural modifications to our church to support both the heat pumps, the ductwork, and the air handlers that were going in there. So what seemed like it was initially going to be a quick, tiny, achievable project became a little more complicated than we thought it was going to be. So that was really, I think, the first point of our journey, is that you have a concrete problem that the community basically unanimously, except one person who thought it was okay to come to church when it was that hot in the summertime. But overall, the congregation was really behind getting air conditioning inside the church. When we had the place kind of torn open, we asked them, is there anything else that you would like to see go on here? And we heard a lot of the same things over and over again from people. For some reason, they wanted to hear our sermons, and they asked for a new sound system. Our lighting wasn't the best in our church. It was pretty dark and hard for people to read. And there were also some unfortunate things happen. We had some beautiful stained glass windows from Judson, who was a big West Coast family doing stained glass windows. They were falling into disrepair. On the right-hand side over there, you can see that the windows had warped so badly in some cases that the lead and the glass were separating from each other, and there were holes in there. Our landscaping had become a mess as our beloved ficus trees grew and grew, and so did their roots. And we also had a little controversial tile on our floor that was jarring to most people as they came in. We had tiny stylized crosses all across the church from different parts of the world and different histories. So we had Celtic crosses, Jerusalem crosses, but one of them was a filthed cross, which is a mirror of a swastika, which isn't the most welcoming sign that people would like to see as they're coming into the church. So we wanted to do something about that as well. So we had some listening sessions with the congregation over about a 2-month period. We invited folks to come in and say, what would you like changed about this place? And so we got our list together. But we didn't want it to just be fixing stuff. We wanted it to be some fun stuff as well. In the front of our church, we had crowns on our bell tower, and I noticed this morning that I was coming in, y'all had some on your lawn outside there. Maybe that's where they went, because nobody knows the story of where the crowns went from our church. But we used to have them, and now we didn't, and folks thought it would be nice to put the crown back on the bell tower again. We also had 4 empty statuaries in the front of our church, and seemed like cozy homes for saints to come in. So to coax people into coming to the annual meeting one year, we actually put forward a nomination process. We said we'd love to hear from you all who you think belongs in the niches of our church. And we narrowed it down, we had a vote, and as New Englanders, you all will love to hear that Bishop Barbara Harris is on one of our statuaries now. I'm a big believer in saints are human, so she also has a crozier in one hand and her cigarette in the other hand. And so that is one of the fun things that we did as part of our project as well. So the next step wasn't really the fun one. It was we had this laundry list of items that people wanted to see, and we wanted to go out and start developing a defensible budget for what a capital campaign will look like. So we had about 40 or so people go out and talk to vendors, get multiple bids for work, understand what the scope of everything was going to be, and that took about 2 to 3 months. If you've ever worked with contractors and such, you'll know that sometimes their schedules changes. Getting an estimate back from them after they spend the time talking with you can be time consuming. So that took quite a bit of work, but the end result was we had a spreadsheet that we had put together of about 40 different things that we wanted to be a part of the capital campaign. We had our low bids, we had our high bids, and it was time to put the budget together. So what we did was we weaved everything into kind of one sheet up there with the low and the high bids. And then with each of those items, we also had anywhere between a 10% and a 30% markup. At the time that we were in, right, we were seeing material prices go higher and higher, and at the speed of church governance, we knew that the project wasn't starting tomorrow, it was going to be starting a year from now. So we wanted to adjust for those prices, but we also knew that some of the more complicated projects, like putting in the air conditioning, like doing some work on a roof, there might be some things that we needed to budget a little more for. So to those, we attached about a 30% contingency markup on there, because you always have to budget for the unexpected. And yes, this happened during the project. I don't know how everyone was fine, but somehow somebody missed the fact that we had a huge hole in the street where the transformer was going for our new electric line, and at about a pace of 2 miles an hour drove into that. So after we had to put everything together, the next step was to play it back to the congregation. We said we spent a lot of time listening to you all, hearing what you wanted your church to look like at the end of the project. And we went, and here's how much everything is going to cost, and we walked them through the cost of the projects. One of the incredible things that happened during this process is that as we were going through and talking about how much some of these items were going to cost, 1 or 2 people might say, how is lighting going to cost that much money? And the awesome thing was that because we had involved so many people in getting those estimates together, like popcorn, people were coming up and saying, oh, actually, because before we even think about lighting, we need to redo this or something like that. So it was really the community coming together and defending this project as a whole as to why everything was going to cost the amount of money it was going to. And it was really just a beautiful experience, not having that come from a core, small committee of people, but really being the congregation at large defending the cost of this project. The next part of it was asking for the money, and this was, to me, probably the most surprising part of the whole project. I did not expect it to be anywhere near a pastoral process as it actually turned out to be. The way that we did it was we started with a few of our core donors who we knew that it was basically up to them and their generosity if this project was going to kick off or not. So either, I'm still unsure to this day whether it was bravery or stupidity, but we went to our biggest donor first and did the pitch to that person. And what was beautiful time after time after time was this actually wasn't a conversation about money. People wanted to come in, talk about how this place had changed their life, what it means to them, remembering the moment or the crisis that brought them into here, or remembering that this was their church from the very day that they had grown up and they had been baptized here, married here. And it was story after story of people saying, and I want this place to be around so more people can get out of it what I got out of this place. And so this is how much money we're giving you. There was not one conversation when we actually had to ask somebody what their gift was going to be. They had their beautiful story about what the place meant to them, and they said, and this is why I'm giving the gift that I'm giving. And we would give updates frequently. So we had our classic capital campaign thermometer, and we watched it go up and up. And within a matter of about 2 months, we had our fully funded capital campaign, which was incredible. That required us shutting down our church, which meant that we had about a month and a half to turn our not so beautiful parish hall into a worshiping space that we'd be there for about a year and a half. But with some blue wallpaper, we made it happen, and that was our home for a while. And what people really loved was the way that through newsletters and social media, we really let people know what was going on inside their church week after week. So we would make goofy Instagram videos. We would talk with some of the artisans that were working on there. So we did like a little quick video with the stained glass window restoration company talking about how they even got into this line of work in the first place and why they were enjoying this project so much. You could see our new statues in the front of the church with the crown of our bell tower there now. So it's just really a matter of telling the story and letting people see in real time what was going on inside their church. They loved the pictures of the scaffolding. They would sometimes get nervous about where I was crawling up on the scaffolding to do some of the videos that we were doing, but it all worked well. We also kept them pretty up to date financially on how things were going on, so we would monthly publish a budget, all of the items that we had in there, what was being spent month to month on each of them, so that way everyone could very transparently see where the money was going. And like everything else, we had to adjust the budget a little bit. We had that 10 to 30% markup, which on good days meant there were some items that were coming under budget, which was incredible. And we had a couple items that went over budget. But our guiding principle is that we really wanted this to be a one-time ask to the congregation and not keep going back to them more and more and saying, oops, we ran out of money again. So we were able to manage the budget internally thanks to those different risk factors that we associated with each of those items. And at the end of it all, we had a really big celebration, giving thanks to all of the donors and giving thanks to God for everything that we had been able to accomplish. We had some clergy come back who had served the parish years ago. It was great for folks to see all of them. And it was just a really proud moment from our congregation. As we were talking to some of the folks about what their gift was going to be, it was really emotional hearing from some of them that they had planned their 90th anniversary of the church, thinking that was going to be their last hurrah. The sense of pride and the sense of faith that the community had by the end of this project really transformed our community. And so, again, I don't think that there was anybody in that parish who 10 years ago thought that this project would have been possible and this is where we'd be today. So my prayer to you all is that if it sounds impossible today, good. Do it anyway and have faith.
One of the other great young leaders of our church, made his way all the way to Maine to be with us. Thank you. Welcome.
That's a lot to follow. Singing, photos. Bring the greetings of the Church of the Epiphany in the city of New York, home of the New York Knicks. And I don't know, if you're going to do those things, we're home of Broadway, so I'm going to dance. This is what I'm going to do. If we just throw one photo up, that's, you know what?
There we go. Hang on 1 second. Not that one. Not that one.
That one.
Which one?
Can I see that one? No.
No. This one. No.
Oh.
Not that one.
That's fine, just one of the background.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm so excited to be with you. This is really special. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Bishop Brown, for inviting me. It's good to be reconnected with an old colleague of mine, Tim Boggs. I'm delighted to be with you. When I was putting this together, I appreciated the task of speaking about what it's like when projects get hard, and how sometimes your hope in what the project might be can change. And so I told a colleague of mine in the office, I said, I have a title for this. I'm going to call it the backside of hope. And he said, you know, that has a certain anatomical sort of imagery. And so realizing that I had that wasn't going to work, I thought, okay, whenever a priest sort of loses their way, they need to go back to Scripture. And so I want to read to you and use as a guide, and I just lost my place here, Psalm 126. You all know Psalm 126? Yeah, this is a good one. We're going to use this as our guide for the next 20 minutes or so. This is one of the Psalms of Ascent. It would have been said when you were entering the temple in Jerusalem. And it was sort of ascribed that it was written when the Israelites came out of exile into Babylon, and so they're returning back into Jerusalem. The psalm goes like this. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the streams of the Negev. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing their sheaves with them. Now, we have to think for a minute what exactly it was that they were describing. They were describing, forgive me, this is where I lost my page just now. They were describing the return from exile in Babylon, right? The Israelites are sent away from Jerusalem, away from the land in which they had been established for so many centuries, and now they're in a foreign land, and after 50 years they're coming back, right? And so here the psalm is saying, you did this thing for us once, do it again. Bring us back like that time when we were so overjoyed to be, to follow you. But I think if we go back for a second and we look at exactly what that return was like, we'll see it wasn't exactly maybe as rosy as the psalm would capture. This is from the book of Ezra, and it describes them returning back into Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple. And Ezra says, and all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of different houses and old men who had seen the first house wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid. Though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shouts from the sounds of the people weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. And so I will use both these lessons as I go and tell you a little bit about my story and about the church that I'm here to share with you. I also recognize that I'm doing a little scripture thing, and my scripture professor is here. Deirdre Good, this is so exciting. Oh, she was. Where did she go? She just must have stepped out. She's here. I saw her. It's really special to have her here. This is exciting. Maybe she just walked out on me. She said he's already off the rails. Oh, she's moving the car. Okay, good. I have kind of learned that in my ministry that God has called me to the vineyard, like a lot of you, all of us. God has called us to the vineyard. I have learned after doing this for a little while that God's called me to rocky vineyards. And I sort of, I take that on, and sometimes I shake my fist at it a little bit. I came from a parish in the Diocese of Pennsylvania that had fallen on hard times. They had a lot of conflict for a long period of time, about 14 years, and that congregation went from some 200 on a Sunday to 20. What I found was a muscle and a delight in the ministry of revitalization and of growing parishes. And when I left after 6 years, that church was in a much stronger footing. And so that set me up for my new call that I have had now for 3 years at the Church of the Epiphany in New York City. And I'll sound like I'm bragging. I'm bragging on them, please understand, because their story is so profound. It's what made me want to leave my church and join them in New York City. I was so moved by what they had taken on. The Church of the Epiphany is 194 years old. It's been moving around New York City for a long time, but in 1938 it moved to the Upper East Side. And if you're familiar with that term, the Upper East Side, let me just clarify that New York has two Upper East Sides, one of which you've heard about, Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue. That is a different world from where we are on York and First. It's a little more middle income, Manhattan. We have a lot of folks who are we call sort of apartment poor. Rent's high and living there is high, and folks do the best they can. The church that was there, we can find this. Yeah, there's one that's just the article. This one, that one. Okay, yeah. This is what the church used to look like. In 2018, they had a really bold idea. The hospital that they're next to had really taken interest in that property and wanted to build student housing, medical student housing. And the Presbyterian church that was a block away had just closed and was eager to sell it to another church. And so this idea began to kind of get hatched about selling the old Church of the Epiphany, which had been there since the 1930s, and tearing it down and giving it to the hospital, and purchasing the Presbyterian Church, which was the center of the Czech community in New York for a time, and renovating it, basically tearing it down to the studs and creating a new space within it. This was an idea that came about in part because the building they were in, the first building you see on the left, had a lot of deferred maintenance. The endowment was shrinking. They were tripping over themselves. It was, I think, 9,000 square feet, and they had a large feeding ministry. And so there was in a preschool. So there was just a lot of complicated uses of space. And so as the ceiling above them began to crumble and they were constantly moving things around, they realized that they had pruned back as far as they could, and at some point you have to sort of name that the building wasn't serving them anymore. And so they thought about doing this, and in their discernment, the rector at the time said, "This is where I tell you that I'm on the finalist slate to be the Bishop of Arizona, and if I get it, I have to go." And sure enough, a couple months later, she did. And so this church now has no rector. They're in a season of transition. This idea is still hanging out there. And the vestry, in their courage, said, "You know what, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's sell the church that we got married in, that our kids were baptized in, that we have been in funerals for decades. Let's sell it. Let's take that Aeolian Skinner organ and sell it for parts. Yeah, I don't like that one. And let's buy the Presbyterian church and let's renovate it. And so they did. They set out to do this. And here, let me just walk you through some of the numbers. These are New York City numbers. My eyes kind of popped when I saw them the first time. They make more sense now in their context. But the church had about a $2 million endowment, not enough in New York City. And they were able to sell this property on the left here for $68 million. And so they walked to the bank with a check for $68 million. And at the end of the day, they had $70 million in the bank account. They purchased this one here, you see, for $22.5 million. And they set about to spend $20 million on its renovation. And so all in, we would be, you save a little bit of margin, so we'll call this $45 million, and then we'll take the additional 25, and we'll use that as the endowment to live off of. And that will be what supports the church. And so they set about doing this, and the paperwork was all signed at the end of 2019, and construction began in February of 2020. Now, you said something about a margin of 10 to 30%. Yeah. Don't take on a large-scale construction project in Manhattan in a global pandemic. This thing got really complicated really quick. First, the pandemic. That slowed down all the efforts to get supplies in. It delayed all of the workers. We still find things that seem like they were just duct taped together. This pandemic construction is just a house of Easter eggs that keeps on giving to this day. There were other complications. We discovered that there's a natural river that runs out of the Jackie Onassis Reservoir in Central Park, beautiful, out into the East River, and it just comes up right at the plot that we had bought. So when they excavated down to build a cellar for all the mechanical equipment in the storage room, it was like striking gold. I'm from Oklahoma. It's like striking liquid gold, except this time it's just underground city water. And they've got to put a fix to it quick. And so that caused the whole architects to go back and redesign it. That took months of additional work. Somewhere along the way, let me show, can I see? I feel like I'm like Pat Sajak. Show me this one here. Yeah, it play on that way. Yeah, it's bad when, it's bad in New York City when you see flames coming out the top. The church had a fire, like a 3-alarm fire. The rafters didn't cool, and it burned the whole top of the sanctuary off. So we were up against a pandemic. We were up against a fire. We were up against a flood. This is where it starts to sound awfully biblical. Good thing I brought the book. They really went through it. A project that was intended to take 2 years took 4. At one point, they realized they had to get out of the existing property because the hospital really wanted to start their own construction. And so, for a good 3 months, they were holding their worship and all of their church activities in the community room of the apartment building where the rector lived. You cannot hold a community together like this. And so, this church went through the ringer. I was so proud of them, and I'm still really proud of them for enduring that. My running joke is always that the first bill I pay, the most important bill I pay every month is the exterminator, because fire, floods, and plagues, those locusts aren't going to get us now. I came all the way for that. They're so tired of hearing me say that joke. So tired of it. Where did we land? Well, when I started in the winter, when I was called in the winter of 2023, we really felt like that was the end of this project. That they had been through a 4-year interim rectorship, that the pandemic was behind them, that they had finished the building. They had just moved in a couple months before I started in a temporary certificate of occupancy. And so they had just started to call this place home. Everything was still in boxes when I got there. So it was a cool time to start. It was like really getting the keys to a brand new church, which is unusual. I had sort of embraced this idea that they had, that this was at the end. I was at the end of this season. What I learned, and maybe this is where talks about getting difficult, is, and they had been through the difficult part, certainly, but there was still more. Because my job was to ascertain how much of that dream in 2018 aligned with where we landed in 2023. And here are some numbers for you. The congregations hold hard together in pandemics. You know that. When you have a long interim rectorship, 4 years is a long time. That's hard to hold things together. When you do a giant move, churches don't move in New York City. So you do this, even though it's an avenue away, it feels like a whole part of like a different neighborhood. There was about a third of the congregation left. So we had lost about 2/3 of the congregation through that. So now we look at the numbers. And I sort of told you at the outset that the margin, 10 to 30%, that's what you're supposed to do. That $25 million that we had planned to use as the endowment, we spent all of it. And so the new project ran $25 million over. All in was a $70 million new church. Somewhere along the way, they had taken out a mortgage from the Lutheran Investment Fund. Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. And what that did at a really low interest rate, like 2%, that allowed us to hold on to the corpus of the remaining endowment. So we had about $12 million in that endowment. That returns more than the mortgage and its interest required. And it's like a 25-year mortgage. But what we learned was that there was, we had to do some vision setting for where we wanted to go. That the dream didn't really fully align with where we thought it was going to end up. And that we had to recognize the challenges that were still with us. And so I'll give you one of the big examples that was the most painful one. We had a preschool at the old church, and we built the new church in part with a mind for how that preschool could grow. 10,000 square feet of brand new classroom space. It was gorgeous. By the end of my first year, it was becoming obvious to us we couldn't afford it. And 6 months later, we announced we were going to close it. And that was difficult. And we have now found a tenant that is in a multi-year, multi-million-dollar lease agreement with us that has moved us from about a $250,000 deficit on the school side alone to $750,000 in revenue as rent. So $1 million swing in our annual operating, but we're still taking out probably more than we can spend. Where have we ended up, though? Let me show you a good one. Can I see this one? Give you 2 more photos. That's what it looks like today. Yeah, it's cool. It's 8 stories, 36,000 square feet. We have a partnership with a senior center. They do 200 sit-down lunch for 200 neighbors every day, 6 days a week. We have our own dinner program that we run for food insecure people in the community. That's 200 a week. That's all volunteer run. We do our church activities. There's support groups that meet there. It's a real full house. The school is a special school that serves kids with special needs. We feel like we're actually more mission aligned by renting it out to them than we were in operating our own preschool, which is kind of astounding. And I'll show you one community. Let's see. That one. Just to show you a little bit of who the crowd is. Yeah. Nice folks. So let's go back to Scripture for a minute, because I told you that's where we would start this. If we look at the story of the Israelites, there was so much outside their control, right? The whole psalm is around the idea of exile. Well, the exile was not a voluntary thing. There's so much that was outside of their control. And so let me pause on each of these points and offer you a takeaway. Transformation. And this idea that we're talking about, church transformation, I think very rarely is it fully voluntary. Most of the time it finds us. Maybe that's the property is decaying and we know that we need to make significant changes. Maybe that's the neighborhood has changed. How many of you agreed to the pandemic? Who signed up for this, right? And yet look how that's changed your ministries. Who live streams now that didn't before, right? I didn't know what Zoom was in March 1st of 2023. I ran my whole ministry off that a month later. Transformation is very rarely a voluntary thing. Now go back to Scripture once more. So much was outside their control. Ezra tells us that when they rebuild the temple, there is competing interpretations of this experience. Those who were there before remember what it was, and they grieve what it looks like now, because it's not what they remember. And the younger folks, in this case, that were born in exile and are now in Jerusalem are seeing in their eyes something they had only ever heard told to them. And so they're overwhelmed, even as others are grieving. So there could be competing interpretations of a common experience. My takeaway for us is that very rarely do these transformations end up where we plan them to. That we can set out with a vision, but where we land isn't necessarily, hardly ever, where we thought we were going to end up. I mentioned our preschool to you. The warden that I have now, it was a warden then. She took a little break, and then she's back now. She's incredible. When we voted to close the preschool, she said, I want to start that conversation by offering you an apology. Because when I signed up for this idea of selling the property 5 years ago, I thought it would work. And I see now that it doesn't work, and I wish I had paid attention to how things are changing. I didn't know, and I thought we could do it, and we can't do it. And we have to rent it instead, and I'm sorry. There was grief around that, certainly. There was tremendous grief within our community about that closure. And I told you 2/3 of the congregation did not follow them across First Avenue into their new home. Some of that were folks that didn't want to wait for the church to settle. Some who thought this wasn't a good use of money. And maybe some of you might think that too. Some who said that the new place looked different than the old one, and they'd rather just go find something that reminds them of where they came from. The Israelites teach us that coming out, very rarely do we have the same interpretation of that experience. Then the journey can weave and ebb. But God sees them through. Doesn't God do that? God gets them back. And so I think the takeaway here for us is that the hope we have is not in the project, in our ability to complete the project, whether that's a capital campaign or even a good stewardship drive. The hope is in God. That's it. The hope is in what God will do in our midst, in the belief that God is with us no matter what comes of it, whether the church catches on fire or a car creeps into a very obvious hole. The psalm says, we remember when you did these tremendous things. Now do it again. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the water courses of the Negev. Do it again. That's what they ask of God, to do it again. And so what has guided us in these 3 years of transformation that I have been with him for at Epiphany, but builds on 4 additional years of transformation preceding my time, what has guided us is the mission of the church. And I don't mean that in the context of a broad mission statement that churches have. I mean, what is the church for? I don't believe that our world needs more community centers with a chapel. I believe that the church needs the churches to be churches. And so when I identified the school, we were going to lose the church in order to keep the school open a couple years more. I remember telling family members that, school family members that, and they said, so long as we get through the 3 years that we want our kids to be here, we don't care what happens to the church. That message did not resonate with the congregation. but had not had a new member from the school in 12 years. We recognized that we had to narrow the aperture and that we had to do those things that churches are called to do, to put God at the center of our work. So we made Sunday morning an experience worth showing up for. We created good music, and we hope to offer lively fellowship and adult education. We create something, and now people are coming. We have formation offerings. We're raising up children. We have a lay-led youth group that is one of the largest in the city now. A lay-led youth group, kids that meet every Tuesday for like 40 weeks of the year. We continue to serve our community through our dinner programs and through other ministries, and we feel like we're just getting started. And I can tell you that because we've doubled in 3 years. But I think we've done that because we've done what a church is supposed to do. And so I hope that this is helpful to you. This idea of the Israelites coming out of exile and recognizing that the transformations don't always go the way we planned, but when we see God at work in them, we will recognize that God is with us, and God has been with us. And we will find the courage to say, do it again. Thanks.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. Then we were like people who dream. That's what we get to do. How blessed we are. And now you get to stand up and stretch and be fed and to talk to these good people more intimately than you've been able to so far. We're going to divide up into 4 places in this wonderful, wonderful building. The rector's office, two downstairs, 2 corners of downstairs where we were for coffee, and in the chapel, which is halfway downstairs. And each of you are going to grab a room. Maybe Susan will assign you a room, and you can decide who you would like to be in conversation with for your questions and things that came up. We're going to do it for 45 minutes in each room. I'm going to hope that our committee can move around and meet people as well, and maybe help facilitate some of the conversations. Grab a lunch, right?
Lunch is downstairs.
So go downstairs first, grab a lunch bag, and go to one of the rooms where you meet with the folks. This will take a little bit of moving around, so give yourself a little bit of a break. Maybe let's have that first conversation be for 45 minutes or so, and then stand up and go to another room and meet with another person. Maybe our panelists can be timekeepers and say, it's time for you to go. Go, send them off. Shall we do that? Yes. Great. Onward.